Good afternoon and welcome back. This is a little video to talk about some practical matters on book construction because I see so many of the same question popping up over and over on Facebook groups with people new to the craft, and they really don't have access to tutorials that give them some very practical ideas about things. So I thought, well, I'll discuss a few items and then maybe that'll help you in some way. So the first thing is that when we talk about book construction, the number one thing I hear about is my holes are too big, my holes tore, I don't know what to do about punching holes, and the whole sewing thing just sort of throws people for a loop. So when you're punching and sewing, there's a few things that you kind of need to understand about things. One is that we usually punch with a tool called an awl, A-W-L, but those can be quite different. If you look at this awl, the shaft, the needle section is consistent from one end to the other. So if I'm punching through a whole bunch of papers, the hole in the back is going to be the same size as the hole in the front. However, if I use an awl like this, which I have a little arthritis in my hand, and when I get tired, this is particularly helpful because I can grip it with my whole hand, it doesn't. It gets thicker as you go down. So if I punch through a stack of papers, it's much thicker than at this point. I'm going to start getting a bigger and bigger and bigger hole, and when your thread can slide around, you're more likely to tear your paper. So that's one thing. The other thing of it is that when you're punching, usually we punch into the crevice of a book, but you want to be sure that you're punching straight down and not at an angle in any way, because punching at an angle means that you're kind of tearing through some of the paper and will also lead to further tearing. So try to be really sure that you're punching absolutely perpendicular. Then when you go to pick your needles, a lot of people, when they first start out, they talk about getting an inexpensive like upholstery or embroidery needle. But this one here is an actual bookbinder's needle, and you will notice that the eye of the needle and the shaft of the needle are the same size. This, on the other hand, the eye of the needle is a whole lot larger, so when it's pulling through the hole, it's going to tear it, and you can't always trust the way that it's going to tear. So I've gotten away from using this and stuck with using the bookbinder's needles just almost 100%. The other thing is when you're actually doing the sewing, and this I've just started out as a 5-hole stitch. When you're tightening your thread, do not pull against the direction that the thread is traveling. If you look here, this thread went in here and out here, so it's traveling in this direction. If I pull this way, I am not, gently, I'm not going to tear the hole. If I do this, pull backwards, look what happens. I tear my hole. So that is one of the most common mistakes people make is they pull back the thread back against itself, and then it tears their hole larger. The other thing that happens is, and I'll just finish this out real quick on the 5-hole, is that when you're tying off in the center, it's really easy for that knot to, as you're pulling the knot tight, for the knot to pull through the hole. So the way that you prevent that from happening is that you bring the needle out on the opposite side. I don't know if you can see this, but this center thread, these two threads are on either side. That way when I pull and tie, I'm tying across this thread and it's not going to pull back through the hole. So that's a real important thing to know about. The other thing that I get is how do I punch my holes and keep everything straight? Well, my trick is to use this grid paper. It is on 1/8 of an inch, and that way I know that I can get things very, very close together, because most of my books now are sewn where the holes are 1/8 inch apart. And I create a punch template based on the height of the book and the height of the piece of paper and how closely, like right here, you can see that these signatures in this particular book that I made were 1/4 inch apart. And so I punched my 5 holes, and then into the material that I was going to sew into. Now, I'm going to sew into leather like that? Am I going to sew into some fabric like here that is getting glued in? Whatever you're sewing into, I use that to punch that. And then I make another jig where I've lined up and I punch the holes, make these holes match here. And this is what I punch my signature with. So I lay this inside my signatures and punch them. And this jig should be the exact same height as your tallest page. If you do a Nik the Booksmith style book and your pages are various heights, you want to make this as tall as your tallest piece so that you can get it all lined up. And then once again, when you're punching, you want to go straight down perpendicular to the surface. So for each book I have 2 jigs. The jig to punch whatever I'm sewing into, and the jig for punching the holes into the signatures. And because I don't want my holes to be too varied in size, I punch each signature separately. I know some people like Nik the Booksmith will stack a whole bunch of signatures together and punch them, but I find that trying to stay perpendicular and not wobble and to keep all of the holes symmetrical, it's impossible for me to do that with a big stack, especially when you want to be as precise as this. You can't have holes that are a 1/16 or whatever off because you punched sideways or this way this time, and so that's kind of important. Then the other thing people have problems with is that, well, how many pieces of paper do I put and how many signatures? Well, that's kind of variable. And so nobody can give you a good answer. If you are gutting a book and using something that's sort of pre-made, and I know these are not the right height because this is for another project and has nothing to do with this cover because I make all my own covers now. But if you gutted the book, then you can measure the spine. This one is, I'm trying to do it towards you, but it's about 1 1/8 inch wide, okay? So there's 2 ways of figuring out the signatures for that. One is that I go ahead and I make the signatures, I decorate them, I go ahead and put the ephemera in them for this first part. When I go to sew, I pull the ephemera out because I don't want ephemera falling all over the place while I'm trying to sew. It just gets annoying and it slows me down, so I take it all out. But for the purposes of measuring for my spine, I put it all in because I want to know how thick things are. So if I was making my own spine, say I had 2 covers and I was going to make a spine, I would take this group of signatures that I've decided on, I'd take my ruler, and I would stand these up where everything was kind of perpendicular, had plenty of space, and I would be able to see that the signatures were the same distance apart here in the back. And I would know that they were about, you know, from the ruler I could say, okay, these are about 1/4 inch apart, and that's going to be too big, but if I squeeze it down to where they're about 1/8 inch apart, well, that fits right into my 1 1/4 inch spine of this particular book. But if I wanted to add more ephemera and it be a little bit wider, I could see what that was going to be, and I could make my spine correspondingly. The other way to do it, if you have a pre-made book that you're trying to fill, is stack them in there and stand this up, give it a little shake, and you can see that that's about the right number of signatures because it's not alligator mouthed, they stand in there quite well, they all fit down into the actual spine, they're not, you know, coming around the bend or anything like that, and that would give you a good estimation. So when I'm first constructing the book and I'm adding the ephemera. I do a check of this, of the width, usually with a ruler, because like I said, I'm going to make the cover last. And I kind of sit it up there and look at it and go, okay, well, maybe I can add a little bit more ephemera. If it's already getting way too big, then I really can't. I'm going to have to take something out or make a bigger spine or do something like that. And so, yes, that's why it gets confusing. This book here that has 5 signatures of 10 pieces of paper each, or 50 pages, has exactly the same number of pages as this book. But the ephemera in here is a lot more. There's a lot more flip outs and ephemera and lace and things that can be accommodated, because look at the size of that spine versus the size of this spine, because of the spacing. So that's where that spacing between the signatures gets really important, is you know, how fat are each of these signatures going to be, and how much room are they going to take up. And when I'm going to make a book for myself, where I'm like going on a trip or doing something, and I know I'm going to be adding a lot of ephemera that I don't currently own, look at here. This is the way I make my book. Do you see how I've left myself at least that much space for ephemera? Sewn the same way as I have the other books, but I did not fill it up with ephemera. I just left space between the signatures, knowing that I would be adding ephemera as I went along. So I hope that that answers some of the questions that I know are out there. It is confusing. It takes practice. You don't get it right the first time. You don't get it right the second time. Maybe by the 15th or 20th time you start feeling like you got it, and then you'll still run into questions, and that's okay. It is a craft. It is a learning process. Don't get frustrated with yourself. I can't tell you how many books I bound and then went, you know, I just don't like the way this book is working, functioning, and I have taken it apart, maybe added a signature, taken out a signature, taken a page out of each signature, and then redone the insides of the book to fit what I was trying to do. So it's okay. Just keep playing with it. It's a lot of fun, and enjoy your journey. Have a great day.